Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. We're your hosts, Em and Jay, and today the two of us are talking about She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. It recently premiered on Netflix, and we were originally planning on making one video just discussing our thoughts, but after watching the series, we decided that we had too much to say to fit into one video. So we're going to review the episodes individually, starting with the first two, since it was a two-parter. First thing that we wanted to bring up is that I honestly feel like the fact that this is trying to be a reboot hurt this show overall, because the team behind this show doesn't actually have the rights to the Masters of the Universe. So they mention things like Grayskull and Eternia, but they never bother explaining what those things are. And they can't really because they don't have the rights to delve into that stuff. I saw a lot of posts on social media of people asking what was Grayskull and if they had ever actually explained it in the show. And other people saying, I think that's where He-Man's from. Originally, in our previous videos, we said that the voice that was calling Adora in the Whispering Woods was probably the sorceress, but it turns out she's not in the show because they don't have the rights to her. Do not try to watch the original show hoping to get information about the lore for this show, because it's not gonna happen. Yeah, they kept very little from the lore and backstory for this new show. Now, if you like this show, that's great, and we don't want to take that away from you. Just know that this is our opinion, and we personally didn't come away with a positive experience. This show begins with Adora being trained as a cadet under the Horde. She's been aged down to a teenager like most of the characters. She and the other cadets are training to fight the princesses, who the Horde tells them are oppressors of Etheria, and they are supposedly working to liberate Etheria. It seems like all the cadets have the same backstory, where they were all orphans and Shadow Weaver took them in. I guess Shadow Weaver just collects orphans to use them as soldiers, as child soldiers, basically. I mean, they're gonna let a young girl be Force Captain. Yeah, that's true. So, I guess they're child soldiers. Catra shows up late, basically to try to steal the glory, but Shadow Weaver sees through it, and she takes Adora aside and tells her that she plans on making her Force Captain. And she says that Hordak has been watching her closely, and that he wants her to be Force Captain, that he sees a lot of potential in her. But that's really weird. I know the rest of the season contradicts that. Yeah, he's not really in these two episodes, but Hordak couldn't care less about Adora. He doesn't even know who she is, apparently. She's nothing to him. And he keeps telling Shadow Weaver not to waste her time by going after her. So I'm kind of confused by this part. I don't know if Shadow Weaver just lied to Adora, or if it was a continuity error, but something is off here. Catra and Adora decide to steal a skiff, and they go past the Fright Zone. They end up in the Whispering Woods, and we all basically know where this is going. This show is kind of like if some company had the rights to Wonder Woman, but they didn't have the rights to most of Wonder Woman's lore. They didn't have the rights to Themyscira, or the Amazons, or Steve Trevor, so instead they made it that Diana Prince is some orphan who was raised by maybe Ares or somebody with Cheetah, and they were basically kind of sisters. Eventually she finds a sword in the middle of some forest, or maybe somewhere, like the bracers, the arm bracers, and that turns her into Wonder Woman, and then she and Cheetah have a falling out. That's basically what this is, but with She-Ra. And the thing is, you can tell a story like that, but that story is not Wonder Woman, that story is not She-Ra. Yeah, and calling it that is just going to cause a rift, the way it did in real life. Because when you reboot an existing property, people already have this idea from what came before, but here it's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, where they want the name recognition of She-Ra, but they also want to make their own show. Being a She-Ra reboot is keeping this show from doing its own thing, but also doing its own thing is keeping this show from being a She-Ra reboot. So the whole thing is kind of falling apart. But we'll talk about that more as we continue talking about what happens in this episode. So while this is going on, Glimmer and her mother are arguing about the rebellion. And it's kind of like if you've ever been at a friend's house and their mom starts yelling at them and they start yelling back and you're stuck there and you can't really do anything about it. That's what this whole relationship is like. This also happens multiple times throughout the season, and it's one of those running gags, I guess, and it ends up overstaying its welcome a lot. It would be like if Wonder Woman had this fight with Hippolyta.
Yeah.
You know, it'd just be weird.
In the middle of the throne room, in front of all of the guards.
Diana, you're embarrassing me in front of my royal court!
Taking these established adults and turning them into teenagers, maybe it is more relatable to the audience, but it is also taking an adult who was capable and turning them into kids who are kind of bumbling and clumsy. The queen ends up grounding Glimmer to her room, and she writes in her diary about how she's upset with her mom, and that's when we're introduced to Bo. Bo wants Glimmer to go with him to find some First One's tech, but he's not really respecting her. She's asking him to be quiet, and he can't hear her, so he's being comedically loud.
This bit goes on for too long, by the way.
So then Glimmer eventually gets him and explains to him that she's grounded, but he just wants her to get the tech with him. And then she and her mother have another argument, and that convinces her to leave. They think if they can pull this off that it'll impress the queen, but we all know it's gonna be more complicated than that. But with Adora and Catra, they stole a skiff and they end up crashing in the Whispering Woods, and Adora comes across a magic sword, and in the previous trailer that we talked about, it appeared that touching the sword turned her into She-Ra. That wasn't the case. There were some people who left comments saying that that was probably just trailer editing, which it was, and I am happy about that. She touches the sword and she ends up seeing these visions, but when she wakes up, the sword is gone, so she and Catra just go back to the Horde, but she can't get it out of her mind, so she tries to go back and find the sword again. She ends up running into Glimmer and Bo.
They get into a fight, but instead of punching each other or something, they just dogpile each other and pull each other's hair.
It's a very comedic fight. The whole encounter is actually pretty comedic. I don't know if it was meant to be comedic or if it was meant to be a serious encounter.
Eventually, Bo and Glimmer capture Adora.
Because Adora touched the sword and she got another vision and passed out. They come across some rubble from probably a Horde attack, and they tell Adora that she's basically responsible for this. And this is enough to make Adora start to question whether the Horde are the good guys or not. I mean, the thing is, I'm surprised she didn't try to rationalize it and say that that's just that the Horde was defending themselves against the evil princesses. Not long after they discover the rubble, they're attacked by this monster, and Adora could run, but she decides to try to help them, which I'm not surprised by because Adora doesn't think of herself as a villain anyway. She thinks of the princesses as being villains, but she's been with these people enough to see that they're not necessarily evil, so she decides to stick around and try to help them, and this is when she becomes She-Ra for the first time, which I was actually really disappointed by because there's a lot that hasn't happened yet. She's still with the Horde at this point. And the thing is, in the original, she didn't become She-Ra until she made a conscious decision to leave the Horde. She's actually had the sword for a while. She's been carrying it around, and she knows that it's powerful, and she also feels a connection to it. And she finds out that He-Man is her brother, and that the Horde has been abusing her
the whole time
and using her.
She actually saw firsthand the Horde committing atrocities. Like, she saw them beating up the elderly and them destroying a man's house just because he said the taxes were too high, and she was able to recognize that that was an unfair punishment.
And so at this point, she's 100% decided that that's not who she's gonna be anymore. And she uses the sword to save her brother. It did feel like it wasn't the right time. They weren't there yet. She could have used the sword to free herself.
Yeah, that was something else that was annoying me. She's tied up and she has the sword of protection, and instead of just cutting herself loose like she should have done, she fumbles around with it for a little bit.
Yeah, she could have showed off her training from the Horde. It was a pretty big monster, but she's been training her whole life to fight these things because this is what we saw them doing when we see the Horde cadets training.
Yeah.
They're doing a simulation where they're in the Whispering Woods and they're fighting off various monsters. So it was kind of disappointing for me.
I feel like Adora as a character
is really inconsistent.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes it's shown why they're thinking about moving her up to Force Captain, but then other times she's really clumsy. Like, she's fumbling around with this sword, or she's kind of falling over. So it's kind of an inconsistent message. Like, is she a powerful warrior who's been training her whole life to do this one job?
Or is she an awkward teenager?
We've already talked about this new She-Ra design in previous videos, so I don't think we have to repeat ourselves. Just know that our thoughts haven't changed.
So this spider monster seems to be connected to She-Ra somehow.
It's probably First One's tech.
Because it calms down when she's there. But then Adora almost immediately falls out of She-Ra. I guess it's because she panicked, but what's the point? What was the point of all this? Because they have to keep running anyway.
Yeah, the three of them end up running from the spider because the spider gets angry again when She-Ra goes. While they're running from the spider, they come across a building from the first ones and they decide to try to get into the building to get away from the spider.
Yeah, I was expecting more action from this show. It's kind of flat in the action department. I guess coming off of something like Voltron, I thought this show would be an action adventure, but it's kind of more of a buddy comedy or something.
They want to get into the building to escape from the spider, but the door won't open. But Adora is able to read the inscription on the door, which happens to be the password to get into the building. They do question why she can read this inscription, and I don't know if it's a She-Ra thing or an Adora thing. They never explain it, because Adora didn't know that the first ones existed. Apparently the Horde didn't tell them anything. So it is kind of curious as to why she can read this and nobody else can. It's just another thing that isn't explained, at least in this season. Maybe in another season they'll explain, but who knows. The password happens to be Eternia, but it's not really important. They never explain what Eternia is either. There's just more questions that aren't really explained in favor of telling jokes.
We don't really find out much inside the building other than the name of the warrior princess that Adora turns into is She-Ra, and then they accidentally set off an alarm system.
We also find out that Glimmer has to recharge her powers. Glimmer asks Adora why she hasn't just left, because obviously they're not very good captors. And Adora says she just wants to find out what's going on. And that's kind of another theme of this series. Adora doesn't really know anything about who she really is or what she's doing. And the thing is, over this season, not much of that actually changes. We find out a little bit more information, but I wouldn't say enough to sink our teeth into.
I guess the point of this season was more to just meet the princesses than actually find out any answers. Maybe they're saving those for the next seasons.
So because Glimmer is pretty weak because she has to recharge, they decide to try to find a town to get a ride back to Bright Moon. When they get there, it turns out that the town is having a festival. Bo finds out Adora's never had a party before. She's never been to a party before, so he decides that they all have to stay and enjoy the festivities. I understand what they're trying to do, and I'm okay with that. They want to show Adora the world outside of the Fright Zone and what it really is like, and give her these different experiences, and I do appreciate that. But it does kind of take up a bit of time. I don't think it had to go on as long as it did. While they're here, they also find a horse. Turns out Adora's never seen horses before.
I'm not really sure why the Horde wouldn't have horses though. I get that they're really into technology, but horses are still useful.
The Horde attacks the village, and Adora believes it's a mistake because she knows that they were supposed to attack a princess stronghold, but this is a village of civilians. So she thinks that she can go talk to the Horde and they'll call off the attack.
The attack is being led by Catra, and Adora tries to reason with her, but she gets shut down and Catra even attacks her.
This scene is a really important scene because it sets up actually the major conflict of this whole season, if not the series. Because it's not so much about stopping the Horde, it's more about the relationship between Catra and Adora. Adora tells Catra that this is wrong and they need to call off the attack, and Catra says that this is what the Horde does. Apparently she's figured out that they're manipulative and they've been lying to them their whole lives.
Yeah, despite the fact that Adora was completely ignorant to the fact, Catra seems to not only be aware of it, but accept it even. And she seems to be totally on board with just being evil and the evil things that the Horde is doing. Like, earlier in the episode, she says that they can go see the world and conquer it. She doesn't say, and we can liberate it from the princess threat. She says that they can conquer it. So she's basically just as bad as the Horde, I guess.
Or she's accepted that they're evil. And Adora at no point ever accepted that. So she asks Catra how she can be okay with that. And she asks Catra to leave with her so they can leave the Horde and they can figure out what's going on and stop being evil, basically. But Catra gets really angry and she says that she's being abandoned so Adora can hang out with a bunch of princesses and that she's only known these
these people for a few hours, which is true, but Catra has known the Horde her entire life, and apparently she knows that they're manipulative and evil, so why would she choose them over Adora, the one person who's ever been nice to her, supposedly her best friend? Yeah, I mean, she suffered a lot at the hands of the Horde, and yet she's so willing to stay with them and fight for them, to the point where she pretty much abandons and attacks Adora, the only person who has been her friend. I mean, they're basically adopted sisters. But the scene plays out as if Adora is somehow in the wrong. Catra's the one who rejected her. Adora tried. Yeah, Adora's the one who reached out to her, and Catra's the one who shut her down. And then when Adora says that she can't go back, she has to find out what's going on, she shocks her with this weapon that she apparently just got, and she says she didn't realize it was that powerful, but she's never had this weapon before, and the first person she's willing to use it on is supposedly her best friend. Catra has so many red flags. I don't know why Adora's even friends with her. Yeah, it seems like a toxic relationship. And Catra refuses to let her leave and make her own decisions. Even though across the season, Adora's constantly reaching out to her, Catra still shuts her down and still chooses the Horde over Adora. And she still says that Adora betrayed her, and how dare she? Yeah, that was weird. Adora didn't do anything
Clearly it was
wrong.
Catra who is pushing her away.
And Adora, all she does is reach out to her. So I really don't understand this relationship. A lot of people online who do praise the show have very high praises for this relationship between Catra and Adora, but
we didn't see that at all.
It's very one-sided.
Yeah.
I think Catra has some issues that she has to work out. She can't keep blaming other people for her own decisions.
Yeah.
There's no point in blaming Adora for the decision that she made. Bo and Glimmer come in to try to rescue Adora with the horse from earlier, and Glimmer manages to teleport Adora away, but she leaves Bo and the horse because she doesn't have a lot of magic left. So they're left to try to fend off the Horde by themselves. Glimmer apologizes to Adora and gives the sword back because she says that she knew that she should have given it back earlier, but she was being stubborn because she's a member of the Horde. And then Adora transforms into She-Ra, and she stops the Horde, and they all go back to Bright Moon on the horse that they don't know who it belonged to, but they keep it anyway, so they basically stole a horse. But those were the first 2 episodes. There was a lot of potential for this series, but I think the execution didn't hit where it needed to hit. The pacing of this show wasn't handled very well.
Yeah, it needed a lot of work, honestly. They spend a lot of time talking, but they don't really talk about anything that important because they waste a lot of time on bits, like
making
comedy
jokes.
bits. Yeah. Many of the problems that we see in this episode don't get fixed as the season goes on. There's still a problem with pacing, with exposition dumps that don't actually get us anywhere, and there's still a lot of questions by the end of the season.
So we hear a lot of the same stuff over and over again, but we don't end up finding out things like, what is Grayskull? I mean, there was 13 episodes. There was plenty of time to talk about.
Recontextualize it for this world, the new lore. What actually is Eternia and Grayskull now?
Because the thing is, you can keep some mystery, but we really didn't get enough of the lore to sink our teeth into.
Like, really make us invested in it.
Things are still way too vague, even by the end of the season.
Maybe the lore isn't that important to the showrunners because they don't have access to it anyway.
And it doesn't seem like it's a big priority for them.
Yeah.
They want to focus more on,
like, the relationships.
I do want to finish up this video addressing the controversy that happened during the lead up to this show's premiere on Netflix, and how I really believe that this didn't have to turn into the firestorm that it did. It's been a few years now that it seems the entertainment industry has not had great customer relations. We've seen it with movies, with video games,
and now with animation and cartoons. And it's really disappointing. There's such a terrible communication between these showrunners and the fans.
It seems like the problem is just getting worse, or there's at least no end in sight. The thing is, people aren't crazy about change. Change can be good or bad, but either way, they're not crazy about it. So when there are a lot of changes made to something that maybe they are very passionate about, people are going to take notice, and sometimes they're not going to necessarily be the nicest about it. It is something that doesn't necessarily come from nowhere. We know this happens. And I know a lot of people say that the internet is a terrible place, but if you've worked in any kind of retail or customer service job, I don't think that it is necessarily just the internet. I think that this is kind of the way that people can be sometimes. Some people will be very belligerent and unreasonable and pretty much want you fired, but it's your job to make sure that customer is happy so that way this can be resolved in a useful and productive way. And it's not so much that you have to pretend that that customer wasn't being super rude. It's just that we have to come up with a solution. You have to find some kind of solution. Sometimes you can't necessarily magically make everything the way the customer wants, but you have to at least come out as the better person in that case. But instead, a lot of these companies are just attacking people and saying anyone who disagrees with them or their vision is frankly a bad person, is some kind of sexist bigot, and that's really disappointing. There's a lot of doubling down, and I think that we've kind of seen before that this doesn't work, and I don't think it worked in this case either. For example, they didn't even have the rights to half of the lore of Masters of the Universe, but also I don't think that the people behind the show even cared. They said several times that they never watched the original, and I don't think they had any interest in it. But now they're stuck in this awkward situation where they are making a reboot, whether they like it or not. For example, in the Teen Vogue article, we saw that in one sentence they said that the original She-Ra was great because it had many different female characters in lots of different roles, such as heroic and villainous and comedic. But then in the very next sentence, they said that the show was static and the characters were one-dimensional. And this was in multiple articles. You know, it wasn't just Teen Vogue. It was basically any article that was talking about She-Ra. They were pretty much attacking the original show and the original characters and also fans of the original. There was a lot of slut-shaming, saying that the original was scantily clad and that the only reason that any fans did like her was because of the way she dressed, as if there was nothing else to like about her. Also erasing people like us, you know, female voices who have a problem with this show, but they were basically labeling anyone who criticized the show as some kind of creepy old man who was angry about losing a waifu. It got so bad that even the original voice actor for Adora and She-Ra had to make a statement, and I don't think it was fair to drag her into this. But she said that all the fans that she's interacted with have been very respectful and very nice, and she's had very positive experiences, and she had very positive things to say. And I don't think it was worth it, really. I don't think it even needed to get to that point. I mean, this show just isn't good enough to change anybody's opinions or minds about it. People are still going to criticize the show. I don't think it hit where it needed to in order to stop that because it fell flat in many areas. I think it is still worth talking about this show because this show has a lot of the problems that we are seeing in the modern animation industry. And we're going to talk about each of these problems as we get to them in this series. So it is still worth looking into, but it wasn't worth all this animosity that happened. The truth is, it's not right to attack people on social media, but it's also not right to lump all of the fans with the most hostile voices. Where is this kind of animosity really going to get the animation industry? I mean, we saw with, for example, Ghostbusters 2016, it didn't really end up working out. Yeah, that movie's not getting a sequel, and it had a really bad marketing campaign that was pretty much plagued with this exact kind of animosity. 2 years later, where is that movie? Does anyone really even remember it? Exactly. I mean, I don't think that this kind of behavior is going to work out for these companies in the long run at all. I know people say that there's no such thing as bad publicity, and they probably do think that this is going to get them attention, but I kind of think that that only works if the end product is killer, and this just isn't. Because otherwise, people are going to take a look just to see what all the fuss is about, but then they're probably not going to stick around in the long term, because they're going to say, okay, well, this is all right, but it's not hitting that really satisfying point for me, so I'm going to check out. Because you're competing with the entire entertainment industry, whether it's Netflix or movies or video games. People have limited time, and if they aren't being satisfied with one area, they're going to move on. season, and they're probably gonna move on quickly. But we'll probably hear that there's a second season, and they'll probably say that, oh, this shows that all the haters were wrong, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, I hope that this show will improve in the second season. Maybe they can learn from some of the things that they did wrong with this season, and hopefully it'll just get better and we can move forward. But I'm not sure. We'll just have to wait and see. I don't think that this sends a good message to women and minority groups, because it just makes them feel like they're being dragged into this, like they're being attacked, and this is not about a cartoon, it's about them personally. Yeah. I think a lot of companies have a habit of making these cartoons and products a personal thing. We felt like it was important for us to speak out about this because we felt like a lot of these companies are trying to speak on our behalf, being young women. Whether it was Crunchyroll with High Guardian Spice or Netflix with She-Ra, pretending like they're a voice for us and trying to speak for us when we can speak for ourselves, and we don't really agree with what they're saying. With the way they've been slut-shaming the original She-Ra and criticizing the entire show as a whole without actually watching it, and criticizing the entire fandom maybe because a few were being unreasonable. It's also a very toxic message to male fans because it suggests that the only reason they would have liked She-Ra was because of her character design and not because of things like her character or the lore of the show. And the thing is, doubling down like that isn't actually going to change the minds of any actually toxic fans. It's just going to alienate normal fans, and refusing to address any concerns that the fans might have about the show isn't going to help the company or this show. It's just going to continue to hurt customer relations. There are people within fandom who are not necessarily great people. Yeah, I mean, there are toxic people in all fandoms. That's just the way it goes. But that doesn't mean that every person in the fandom is one of them. And I think that it's not good to put the weight of all of it on everybody. Yeah, to generalize like that. It is important that the fandom work to better itself, to cut out the toxicity, but there's always gonna be people who want to get the attention. So it's a work in progress, and this doesn't progress us. But what do you guys think? This is just our opinion, and if you agree with it, that's great. If you don't agree with it, that's totally valid. So, you know, feel free to leave your comments in the description. Let us know if you liked the season. Let us know if you didn't like the season, or if it changed your mind. Maybe you weren't too keen on the show going into it, but the season was able to change your mind somehow. We really appreciate you watching. If you do want to see more of this, because there will be more, make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Bye. Bye.